tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Let's talk about one thing we can find a lot more unanimity on among this audience, I suspect, which is the devastating impacts of the carbon tax. One of many, not the only thing driving up the cost of living, but it is in fact doing it. Now, that being said, there is an interesting piece that I wanted to get to on gas prices generally, which is that the Competition Bureau is suspecting there may be a little bit of anti-competitive conduct that is, to use the watchdog's word, guiding gas prices. The Competition Bureau is looking at a company called Kalibrate Canada, which they suspect is guiding gas prices at 100 or 1,700 fuel stations across the country. If you want to understand fuel prices, there's only one guy in Canada that knows everything about them, and that is our good friend Dan McTeague, who is the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy and also a former Liberal member of Parliament back when that meant something very different from what it does today. Dan, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Good to be here, Andrew, and thank you for the invitation. I didn't realize gasoline was such a big deal these days. It certainly wasn't with the Competition Bureau 30 years ago when I was after this file, but glad to see that they're on it nevertheless.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think anecdotally everyone would assume there was some sort of a passive collusion going on because, everyone has seen the intersections with three gas stations where one drops their price and then, half an hour later the next one does and then half an hour after that the other one does. But what is it they're actually thinking is happening here that may be illegal potentially?
Well, I think they're probably looking at conspiracy, which is that a couple of these gas stations are gathering in the dark of night under dimly lit lamps on some street corner and saying, "Hey, this is the price we're going to be setting for the next several days." They may also be looking at the wholesale price of gasoline, which brings us into the whole ambit of why are wholesale prices very similar between competitors. This, of course, has always been a concern that you have, three or four suppliers, Petro-Canada, Imperial being the big players across much of Canada. Of course, there are regional players, Irving and the East Coast, and to the West Coast, Chevron, which is Parkland Refinery in Vancouver. These are smaller players, but they tend to look at the wholesale price of gasoline. They look at the Canadian dollar, and they come up with a formula which basically suggests which way the price is going to go. Now, in some parts of the country, it's usually 48 hours after the price, or 36 hours, I should say, after the price is settled on U.S. markets, we get a wholesale price indication. That doesn't necessarily mean gas stations need to jump on it, but in most major cities across Canada, they do, which, of course, is the reason why I began predicting gas prices well over 30 years ago. At the same time, I was out writing a little report that Lost in Time, report of the Liberal Committee on Gasoline Pricing Canada. You'll see it's about 26 years old, and yours truly was chair of that. At the time, I was concerned about the loss of competition, particularly among retail gas stations. However, this is always going to continue to be an issue. And we know that gasoline prices tend to be also, diesel prices tend to be, jet fuel prices tend to be home heating oil prices. And so where energy prices go and how they're influenced do with, I think, not just the political direction of this country, but the whole issue of affordability, which is something I've been on for several years, as you can see from above. I have every expectation that the Competition Bureau, of course, is being guided by new mandates. The mandate, of course, would be, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We want to make sure that there's no greenwashing. That is to say, people making claims that they're doing something clean, quote unquote, anti-fossil fuel, when in fact they're not. And so I think the Bureau itself has now gone from being, a defender, a cop on the beat when it comes to competition, to bringing in and inviting some of the political partisan considerations, including climate change and, of course, all the issues, the many taxes that go with it, Andrew.
How many independent variables are there that are inputs to gas prices in Canada?
Well, you have to watch in Canada, Eastern Canada, so Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario tends to follow the New York mercantile exchange, or the market at New York is where our wholesale price comes from, and that varies by day. So if we're on a day like today where it's up a couple pennies, that could mean a 1 cent increase. A couple pennies a gallon could mean a cent or two increase come 24 hours, 48 hours from now. So we're likely looking at a scenario where that would happen by Friday. Western Canada, so from Thunder Bay, if you can believe it or not, right up to Vancouver's limits, the Lower Mainland is another market, and that's really driven by the Chicago spot market. And of course, we have the Vancouver, Lower Mainland, and Victoria. So Vancouver Island is also influenced by what's called the Pacific Northwest market. And that, of course, means whatever happens in the United States tends to be the price we're going to pay within 48 hours. At least gas stations will be forced to pay. And you have to include in that, of course, the value of the Canadian dollar. Very important to recognize because Andrew, many people tend to overlook in their so-called millions of dollars in federal government subsidies to come up with these studies that surprise, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, tend to support the government's position. They tend to overlook the fact that Canadian dollar continues to sink, and 137 pennies to buy $1 adds about 24 to 27 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. And that's not even including the issue of taxation, not the one, but the two carbon taxes that we now have in Canada.
And to go back to the retail aspect of this, how much latitude do gas companies have, pump stations have in their prices when these are going up and down? I know Costco, locally is notoriously good for having a few cents less, but how much of a buffer do they really have to pad that out if they want to undercut their competitors?
Well, you have to look at what's called a retail margin, and you have to look at your market. If you have a lot of people coming through, so what they call throughputs, you have a lot of 20, 30,000 liters a day, and you have several hundred cars coming in, then your margin doesn't have to be as high. It could be 7, 6, 5 cents like a Costco, or you have other ways of cross subsidizing that, as Costco would, for instance, with rewards programs, or better yet, you paying $60, $65 a year to have access to their pumps. I can't just walk into their pumps without showing my Costco membership before getting that. So that's a bit of an advantage. Also, the amount of fuel you can use. If you can walk in and say, hey, listen, I can move 1 million liters of gasoline in one given week, or diesel the equivalent, or Supreme, you're going to get the attention of the refiner, because the refinery runs 24/7, 365 days a year. And so those who can move volumes tend to get a little bit of a better discount than, say, Barney's Bait and Tackle and Gasoline Emporium would in an off-site situation where they don't get a lot of traffic. Nevertheless, everyone pays within a few cents the same for wholesale price of gasoline. There are discounts. Costco might get, on a day like today where they rack price, the so-called wholesale price, say for Regina being $4.9, might be buying it for 99 cents. So they get 5 cents off any competitor that's in the area because of the large volumes they can move. They still have to have a retail margin in order to cover the cost of honoring credit cards, cost of keeping the plaza open, paying the staff or whoever is there. And that's why you can't do these things for free. We often see many variations in prices across the country, even within cities, where some gas stations tend to have a lower price than others. They hope that they can attract more to their station by, slightly lower prices. But I think the story here is, and I've said this for some 30 odd years now, is that the real competition is at the retail level, the last 8 or 9 cents a liter. And that's what it comes down to. 8 or 9 cents is all the gas station has control over. And so, if they suddenly remove that after 5 p.m. in a given afternoon and have zero margin, and they're running 7 cents lower than everyone else, obviously they're going to get most of the traffic. And there are many websites, some which I've worked with in the past, Gas Buddy, for instance, which are devoted to letting people know when that happens, how that happens, where the best deals are.
I wanted to, just in the last couple of moments I have with you here, point you to this tweet. Ryan Turnbull, who's a Liberal member of Parliament, had shared this. He says, a new report says Canadian carbon tax did not cause hike in gas prices or inflation. The Conservatives will deny this at all costs. They just can't handle the truth. So I would say, and I think you would agree, that we can't say every increase in gas price has been attributed to the carbon tax, but the design of the carbon tax was to increase gas prices. That was the point of it.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I don't know how the Liberals are saying that there is no connection to increases and the carbon tax.
It makes no sense. And I was member of parliament for Whitby for several years. I know where Mr. Turnbull is trying to come from. But when you get an organization that you pay 35 or 50 million, 52 million to come up with some kind of weird study that doesn't include some experts who know what the hell they're talking about, i.e. me, you know that there's a problem. And you know that this is, from a political point of view, and I'll put my 18 years as a Liberal member of parliament hat back on and say, either you do want the carbon taxes to work to deny and to encourage people to, or discourage people from buying fossil fuels, or you don't. And so it's an argument. If he's making the argument that this isn't inflationary, then obviously it's not working, which brings into question Mr. Turnbull and the Liberal Party's attempt at trying to suggest that carbon taxes are indeed useful. In fact, they're extraordinarily expensive. Canadians understand that. Most do not get back what they put in, and we're not just talking about fuel for transportation, but also energy costs, things like keeping your home heated, and the cost generally as it cascades through the economy of all these things. We have a country with two carbon taxes, British Columbia being a very good example, where you have 17.61 is the first carbon tax, the second the clean fuel standard, the BC LCFS, short for BC Low Carbon Fuel Standard, about 18, 19 cents a litre now. And that's going to be surprising. I fought the government over there many years ago on this point when they said there was 12 mystery cents. It's actually about 18 or 19 now. And that's because the cost of a carbon credit, which is about $500, which British Columbia is very transparent about. It's $500 per credit. For every $110 is 4 cents a litre. So that's according to the federal government's own RIAS, or Regulatory Implementation Act study. So for every $110 of carbon credit, which is $500 today in British Columbia, it's 4 cents. 4 cents times, you break in 110 into 5 from 500, you're talking 15.8 plus GST. So you're about 18 cents a litre roughly for the second carbon tax. That's what's adding to the cost of living. More importantly, last year at this time, Canadian dollar was 131 pennies to buy US dollar. Today, 137. That's adding about 2 cents a litre to the price of gasoline. That's a function of the fact that the world has very little interest in buying Canadian commodities and Canadian currency.
It's a tragedy. Before I let you go, Dan, when should I fill up?
Well, this weekend looks pretty good. I would say by Friday, you'll see prices drop a little bit more than they are now, and right across the country, an average decrease of about 2 cents a litre. So I'm waiting until Friday to fill up. Some can take advantage of this tomorrow if you're in Atlantic Canada. I've just given the information out there. Diesel down 2 cents, gasoline down 1.5. That's likely to be good for Thursday and Friday. Quebec, Ontario, it's pretty much the same, down about a penny. And of course, Western Canada, you've seen prices spike up. They're likely to drop about 2 cents a litre, with the lower mainland Vancouver staying in the 180, 180, 183 range.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, everyone. Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Thanks so much for coming on, Dan. Really good to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.